Now we're going to move into another panel discussion to really sort of wrap up the content of the day. And I'm really excited about this next conversation. I think you'll find that it's got a lot of really dynamic and interesting thought leaders on it in the same way that some of our other panels already today have had as well. This is about connecting innovators with forward-thinking investors. As Greg Deason, who I'm going to introduce here in just a moment, says, it's about the funders and the founders. So we're really looking at a couple of pairings of some really great, imaginative, very forward-looking entrepreneurs. And we have paired with them some people who saw that potential and saw that opportunity to invest. And we'll have them sort of talk about that relationship. How did they find one another, and what did they do to work together to build their relationship? So I'd like to introduce Greg Deason, Senior Vice President and Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Purdue University. Greg is going to moderate our panel, and I would just tell you, again, his bio too in the program. But Greg is a great friend. I consider him a great colleague in all of the work that AgriNovus is doing in the plant sciences, ag innovation space, and the partnership at Purdue. He is a real leader in, and I love this word, activating the innovation, the technology commercialization, and the entrepreneurial assets at Purdue. We now just have to get him to do it all across the entire state, not just in West Lafayette. It's been so successful. So Greg will be a great moderator. I'm going to ask him to come up and introduce our panelists.
I'm so pleased they could Start Me Up going. We have a gathering every Friday morning, and there's a few people in here shaking their head because that is our gathering music every Friday as we get our startup community together in West Lafayette. It's a thrill to be here, and Beth, I want to just thank you for your ongoing and devoted leadership to the ag industry and AgriNovus. It's been remarkable, the things that we're accomplishing. I would be remiss if I didn't take just a moment to do something I hadn't even thought of until I saw all of the wonderful youth here wearing their FFA, what would be considered official dress today. Would you guys mind to stand up for just a moment, if you would? Thank you. Now, before I do want to clap for this group, but before we do that, there's not a one of you that doesn't know the FFA creed, and the first paragraph, just join me in that. And audience, listen to what was about to be said. So we're going to start that off with, I believe in the future of agriculture, with a faith born not of words but of deeds, achievements won by the present and past generations of agriculturalists, in the promise of better days through better ways, even as the better things we now enjoy have come to us from the struggles of former years. Thank you. Please. It's probably been 40 years since I had to memorize not just that paragraph, but to memorize the entire FFA creed in order to earn my jacket and to become a member of the Clinton Central chapter of FFA, something I'm immensely proud of, something that laid a pattern of leadership for me, instilled a deep passion for agriculture. That creed, back when I learned it, actually began with, I believe in the future of farming. It's been modified, I believe in the future of agriculture, and I think that is a healthy sign because it has expanded what we consider it to be involved in agriculture. So thanks for your being here today. I hope you're inspired by the things that are happening in this panel and in this day. This is the future of agriculture for our state, and we want to find great opportunities for each of you to make an impact. So this is going to be an exciting 45 minutes. We've got two great entrepreneurial company founders with us today. We've also got two great investors. We're going to hear their unique perspectives on finding the right fit. And from the investor's perspective, why would you make this particular investment? When we look at it from the founder's perspective, we're going to be thinking about why this investor. So let's meet the panelists. We're going to start off, Chris LaMothe, I'd like to invite you to to the stage. Chris is the CEO of Elevate Ventures. Elevate Ventures has been a great partner, not only with Purdue University, but throughout the state, trying to make an impact by investing in startup companies here in our state. Chris, thanks for being with us today. Secondly, Johnny Park. Johnny is the CEO and founder of Spensa Technologies. Johnny has served as a professor at Purdue. Johnny is now leading a very dynamic startup company at the Purdue Research Park. We've also got Jason Wrone with us today. Jason is here as partner and vice president at Open Prairie. Very excited to have Jason with us. You may miss his bio. We had a little bit of a change, but suffice it to say he's been investing for 15 years in startup companies. He led the A round for the next person I'd like to introduce, which is Steve Kahn, and he is the founder and the CFO of NewLeaf Symbiotics. And Steve has been working closely with Open Prairie. Welcome you as well to our panel today. Thank you very much. Chris, Johnny, Jason, Steve, thanks for being with us today. For our two companies, both of them are dedicated to solutions that increase food availability. In the case of Spensa, protecting against crop loss is one of their particular values that they're adding. In the case of NewLeaf, they've got a beneficial bacteria that actually boosts yields, and we're going to hear more about that in just a moment. In the case of both Elevate Ventures and Open Prairie, we've got an opportunity to hear about their investment strategies and why they're investing in agriculture. I have an extremely interesting role at Purdue University as I direct entrepreneurship and innovation activities. One of the primary concepts that has come from that activity over the last several years is something that we talk about in the terms of how do you take an idea and create impact. And so we have lots of banners that say idea, impact on them, contemplating how do you take an idea and create impact. If you've been to Purdue University, there's a building called Stewart Center, and in that there's a mural that's similar to the size of the wall behind me. And right in the middle of that, you've got a picture of Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln looks about like he does at the memorial out in Washington, D.C. He's signing a document. It turns out that is an act that was signed into law in 1862 called the Morrill Act. Morrill Act is generically referred to as the Land Grant College Act. One of the things about that is it created the opportunity for universities like Purdue University and the other great land-grant universities to come into existence. At that time, the Act specifically said, as we create these universities, they're going to be excellent in agriculture, they're going to be excellent in the mechanical arts. Fast forward, Purdue is still excellent in agriculture. It's a dominant thing that we do. And the mechanical arts come alongside that as what we now today know as engineering. At Purdue, we do not believe that innovation is complete until it finds its ways into the hands of the user, and we articulate that as ideas to impact. It is not simply sufficient to imagine. No, we want these ideas in the minds of our students, our faculty, and our researchers to truly make an impact through improved lives and improved livelihoods. When Mitch Daniels transitioned from governor of our great state of Indiana and became president at Purdue, he brought with him some incredible change, not only in terms of what we were working on, but in terms of just our own mentality about the importance of moving ideas to impact. To set the stage, to change our thinking, we embarked on making it easier for people to license our technologies, easier for inventors to create and then ultimately commercialize their technologies. And we created this thing we call the Purdue Foundry. And the Foundry worked closely with our Office of Technology Commercialization tirelessly to ensure that Purdue is a world leader in seeing that our ideas have impact. If you just look at what's happened in the last 4 years, 165 startup companies have been created at Purdue as a result of these efforts. 100 of those companies were based on Purdue technologies, that meaning that those were technologies created at Purdue that were licensed into those companies as their basic idea that they were going to take to impact. That's going to have a profound long-term impact on the state of Indiana. And the Foundry and Purdue Ventures, which is our investment arm, and the Purdue College of Agriculture also created an Agcelerator, which to date has had 51 applications, has been responsible for launching dozens of companies, and we've made investments in those. So I'm excited to have you with us. And I want to now turn our attention to the panelists that we have today. The way the format's going to work is each of our panelists is going to have about 5 minutes, and they're going to introduce to you their company. They're going to introduce kind of their philosophy, what they're working on. And so we're going to kick that off, if we could, Chris, with you. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at Elevate Ventures. And I think we'll take about 5 minutes for each, and then we're going to have a great Q&A session.
Okay,
Chris?
and I think, do I have some slides?
You do.
That are queued? Is there a... right here. Good afternoon. As Greg mentioned, my name is Chris LaMothe. Before I start, I would like to just quickly compliment Beth, you and your team, on what has been really a very interesting and thought-provoking day. I just think you guys have done a terrific job. And I'm also especially excited to see the young people here with FFA, because you guys are the future. You're going to be the leaders that are moving forward, and the world is changing so quickly. For you guys to be grasping what's going on now and paying attention to this is going to have a huge impact on your ability to lead in the future, and hopefully here in Indiana. I would just comment very quickly. There's some of you that may know a little bit about Elevate and some may not. So Elevate essentially is an organization that started in 2011. It's a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, and we have a contract with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation to manage parts of the 21 Fund. The 21 Fund are monies that are set aside by the Indiana General Assembly every 2 years during their biennium session of the budget for various purposes, but all focused on how to drive Indiana's economy. And a portion of that is investing in startup and early stage companies in Indiana, and that's what Elevate Ventures does. So we essentially have two missions. One that most people know about, that's the investment piece, which is investing in promising startup and early stage companies and providing them with services, the entrepreneurs and the founders with services and things to help them grow their companies. The other thing that we're focused on is building partnerships. The reality is, in years past, in the 20s, well, maybe the early 1900s, really through the 1930s and into the 40s, Indiana was a hotbed for entrepreneurism, mostly in the automotive industry and the manufacturing sector. But that kind of dropped off over a period of years. And so Elevate wants to be part of reigniting communities and partnerships around the state in entrepreneurism and innovation so that we begin to build it back into the very fabric of the culture of our society in this state. It's going to take some time to do that throughout the state, but that's one of the things that Elevate is very focused on. This gives you an idea of just some of the areas that we're currently partnering in. We're focused, you've heard today, several mentions around certain industry clusters or verticals. Elevate is focused on certain verticals. They're the verticals that we've identified that we believe there's enough critical mass in Indiana that we can really build some dynamic and very aggressive entrepreneurism around to be global leaders. We have several partnerships. 1804, which is in southern Indiana, right across the river from Jeffersonville. We have a partnership in southwest Indiana, Jasper, that includes Jasper all the way down to Evansville and an area. We have Startup South Bend Elkhart, which is a partnership with St. Joseph County, Elkhart County, Notre Dame, and Marshall County. We have Northeast Indiana, which is centered in Fort Wayne, but serves the 11 counties around Fort Wayne. So we're building these partnerships throughout the state very thoughtfully, all around trying to drive and develop innovation and entrepreneurship and drive it into the cultures and then support it with investment as those entrepreneurs come up through the system. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about our partnership with Spensa. The founder is Johnny Park, sitting right next to me. And so I'm looking forward, Greg, to the questions that you're going to ask, and I'll weigh in with Johnny on those answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Johnny, you might introduce Spensa to the team here today.
Yep. Thank you. My slide's going to be on as well? Great. So good afternoon. My name is Johnny Park. I'm the founder and CEO of Spensa Technologies. As Greg mentioned, Spensa is located in West Lafayette, part of Purdue Research Park. It was founded in 2009, and it was really based on a Purdue technology that I was involved in while I was a Purdue faculty. As many of you know, the global food security issue is something that you all know, and it's something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs like myself and technologists like myself can really embrace and dedicate our career to solve this really important problem. So that's why really I got into this. So our mission is to provide abundant, healthier food for the world through better agricultural decision making. We believe that it's not about planting more crops. Obviously, Earth isn't growing, right? And it's not about applying more pesticides. It's about using data to manage your farms in a smarter way. So that's what we're hoping to achieve here. So a specific problem that we're addressing in the company is around pest management. When I say pest, it's insects, disease, and weeds. And you'll be surprised to know that today, about 30% of the crops are lost due to insects, disease, and weeds. That's about $60 billion worth of crops lost each year just in the United States. Right? So current pest control through genetics, and they spend about $15 billion worth of pesticide each year, and that's not really enough without accurate, high-resolution, and timely data. But today, acquiring the data is really time-consuming and expensive. So as a result, sprays are often fear-based and reactive. So our solution is to become the independent source of precise, timely, and real-time pest population data through novel sensors, human input, and predictive modeling. We believe that sensor data is important, and we have capability we have sensors that are automatically collecting pest data in the field, and we take that data and put it into predictive modeling so that we can extract insights and find patterns to help growers and consultants to make better decisions. But we don't stop there. Our philosophy is that technology really should be used as a force multiplier of human expertise. So it's really important for us, and we believe that it's really critical that we involve human expertise in the loop, right? Just like a medical field, we have a lot of technologies that physicians are utilizing, but we don't depend on computers to make diagnosis and treat patients today. We rely on human expertise, right? Just like that, we believe that agriculture is sufficiently complicated. We're dealing with nature. We can't completely automate agriculture. Technology is a great tool, but it should be used as a force multiplier of human expertise. So that's pretty important philosophy that we bring as a company, and I think it's a subtle but important differentiator in the market. I see a lot of startups, and I interact with founders of technology companies in ag tech, and many of them believe that the future of agriculture is automating it. I think that might happen in the distant future, but in the near future, I believe the technology should be, again, used as a force multiplier. So, for me, technology and products are pretty important, but my proudest accomplishment at the company is to be able to assemble a great, talented, world-class talents who are mission-minded in a diverse skill set. So this is a picture of me and my grad students when I started the company back in 2009. And we've grown pretty quickly. And this is about a picture a couple of years ago. As you can tell, we are a fun-loving people, mostly geeky. And then this is the most recent picture. As I mentioned, this is something that I really find a lot of pride, is that we are not only technically capable, but we're also mission-minded, that we want to make a positive impact around the world through our products. So that's Spensa. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Johnny. So Jason, tell us a little bit more about Open Prairie, and then we're going to hear from Steve and what he's been doing at NewLeaf.
Sure. So I appreciate Beth and the AgriNovus team inviting some folks from Illinois and Missouri to come over and tell our story. Open Prairie is a venture capital private equity fund management firm. We're based in Effingham, Illinois, small town in rural America. I know there's been a lot of talk about rural versus urban at this conference, but we are founded back in the late 90s. Our founder and managing partner, Jim Schultz, is a fifth generation ag entrepreneur, so has a long history in agriculture. And ag is one of the foundations of Open Prairie. The original investment thesis for Open Prairie was providing capital for seed and early stage companies based in the Midwest. Our first fund was launched back in 1998, mostly university spin-out technologies in IT, med device. And then as we got into our second fund, which was the fund that we invested in NewLeaf out of back in 2008 vintage fund, we invested in NewLeaf in 2013. That fund is focused more on ag tech and med device. Our newest fund that we expect to launch or close on here before year end will be focused on growth and later stage private equity type investments across the agribusiness value chain and focused mostly on rural investments in rural America. So we're excited about the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thanks for being with us. And Steve, tell us a bit about NewLeaf and this new bacteria you're working with.
Let me start with a story about how we got NewLeaf started, because I think it's a little different and unusual. My background is actually venture capital and private equity, and I spent 17 years at a firm. I live in Boston, and I have a summer home up in Camden, Maine. And back in 2011, I was at a dinner party and met a guy. Turns out we both went to the same college, but we didn't know each other at the party. And he told me he had just learned about some really new thing that was cool that some professor was working at the University of Maryland. And he thought he could start a company and license this technology, and he was all excited about it. And I've heard so many of these stories. I just kind of shook my head and went, nah, this is another one of these things. But he said, I really want to show it to you. And we spent the next couple of months getting to know each other. And the more I learned about it, the more intrigued I was. And we didn't know each other prior to this party. And after about 3 or 4 months, he was saying, why don't you join me? Let's do this together. And I'd been on the other side of the table for 17 years as an investor. And the idea of being part of a startup was kind of cool. See whether I could take what I'd learned on one side and apply it to the other side. I didn't know anything about agriculture, but I thought this sounded pretty interesting. And so here he was. He lives in Maine. I live in Boston. And we said, where are we going to start this thing? And we decided we should look at what at that time seemed like the 3 areas that were kind of key for ag technology. And at that point, it was St. Louis, and it was Research Triangle Park and Davis, California. It wasn't Boston, it wasn't going to be Maine, and it wasn't about the 2 of us. We needed to build a team. Neither one of us were scientists. We needed to get the best people. And one of the core principles that I've always felt or had is that you've got to go where you have the best ecosystem and the best chance for success. So after spending a fair amount of time looking around, we centered in on St. Louis and the Danforth Plant Science Center and that campus. And that's where we started. And so we spent a good year courting the venture capital community, and Jason was one of the first groups. I should spend 30 seconds telling you what NewLeaf actually does and how this all works. So this professor at the University of Maryland had found a genus of bacteria that is ubiquitous. It's on all plants on the planet. We've never found a plant that's not completely covered with this bacteria. They're called methylotrophs. And originally, they thought that it was a contaminant, but it didn't do a lot of harm. And this professor said, that doesn't make sense. If it's on everything, it's got to be doing something. So he spent 10 years doing research on this genus of bacteria, and he found some really important interactions between the bacteria and the plant. that there was a symbiosis there, and it was taking in methanol from the plant, and it was producing growth hormones and things that the plant needed to grow. It was based on his research and some other research that was going on at other universities around the world that we started our company. We had none of our own data, but it was all based on that I convinced Jason and a few others to join in. So that's a little bit of the background.
Outstanding. Well, our goal for the next 20 minutes or so is to get some questions asked and answered of the group. And this is about figuring out how does an investor and a startup founder come together. So I might pitch this first to our two founders. A lot going on when you're trying to get a company started, trying to find an investor that is the right fit for you. I would just entertain you kind of defining how you arrived at that, how you arrived at ultimately accepting and being part of an investment from Jason and from Chris.
You want to start?
Sure. Well, so I like to say that there's a good formula, but at the end of the day, when you need money, right? So I put it out there, right? Because that is probably the most important thing. When you're raising money, you're raising money. Now, as you are pitching to investors, I think it's important as founders to be really authentic about what really matters to you, right? Because if you don't, there's going to be already a misalignment in the beginning, right? So I would really encourage, and I think it was helpful from my mentor, that you need to be very authentic. What's important to you, Johnny? Be pretty clear and open about that. So I think so that's number one. And then after that, as I talk about my passion and vision for the company, at the end of the day, when the investor is convinced that I'm not crazy and willing to give me money, then you take it. As simple as that.
Yeah, I think for us it's similar. In the beginning, everybody's interested, but nobody wants to commit. Nobody wants to be the first person to issue a term sheet. And so it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, I put some of my own money in, and that helped because I was putting my money where my mouth was. But that was just some of the early angel money, and we needed serious investors to come in. And Jason was one of the early ones that said, this looks really interesting. And we knew we were going to need, our first round was $7 million. We've raised $54 million so far. So it's a big effort, and we're making a lot of progress. But Jason often refers to this as a big science experiment when he first started, because our only data was from these professors at universities, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it wasn't at scale. It wasn't the way you'd want to see it coming out of a big ag company. That wasn't the kind of data that we had to present at the beginning. So there was a certain amount of crossing your fingers and hoping that they were right, that we really were onto something. So, but by the time we finished raising Series A, everybody, there's a herd mentality. Then they all wanted to come in, and we were oversubscribed. So we spent a year trying to get going, and then at the very end, everybody was piling on.
So from an investor's perspective, we all hear different data, that you've got 100 different things you could think about. Maybe one of those floats to the top and you actually do something with it. What initially caused interest in these two founders and their companies? And then ultimately, what sealed the deal for you in terms of making investments? Jason, I might just start with you.
Yeah, I think Steve kind of alluded to it, and John even spoke to it a little bit. The passion that comes through from the entrepreneur when they're talking about what it is that their vision is for their company going forward. And we spend a lot of time, you can do all kinds of diligence on a company, but when you're investing in early stage deals and seed stage deals, science experiments, as Steve mentioned, and I still say that NewLeaf is more a science experiment, but it's not as big of a science experiment as it used to be. So and Eric said it earlier in one of the talks earlier, we place bets. That's kind of what we do. And as you go through the diligence process, a lot of our diligence is conversations. You can do science, diligence, and everything else, but it's really getting to know the entrepreneur and getting to know the team, because at the end of the day, it's about the people and the team and their ability to execute on that vision that they have set for the company. And if you can get comfortable with that, I think that's what gives you the comfort to place that bet. And then you have alignment. For us, the conversations with Steve were great because, as he mentioned, he's been on the other side. He's been on our side before, so he understood it. So there wasn't really a lot of, you get some of this and you hear the horror stories, but Open Prairie historically has not been that way. We've led or co-led every initial investment that we've made in all of our funds, and so we're used to being the lead investor. We're not afraid to do it. We're not afraid to place that bet. So I think that we saw something in this technology. We had another ag tech investment in the portfolio already, and I kind of saw some similarities in the pathways that both were taking. So we thought this company was, the previous company we invested in had done pretty well and was doing well and was on a good path. So we thought this trajectory was similar, and that gave us a little bit more comfort. But it really came down to just the dialogue back and forth and getting comfortable with the team.
Excellent. Chris?
You don't have a different question for me? He did a great job with that question. In the end, my experience is that you look at a lot of great ideas that we walk away from. What really makes the difference in the decisions we make on investment is the founder and the people that are involved. What's their passion for what they're doing, how open they are to advice, counsel, and encouragement, the quality of the team that they're building, the culture that they're setting within their firm. Those are things that we look at very, very carefully. We have made investments on really, really cool stuff, but not the right leader and not the right team that was put together. And in almost every case, it crashes and burns. But even with a mediocre idea, if you have the right leader and they build the right kind of team, it's amazing what they can do.
Yeah, there's the saying that, I'd rather have a B-plus technology with an A-plus team than an A-plus technology with a B-plus team. Right.
Outstanding. I'm going to invite audience questions, and so if you've got something, come to the microphone. I'll ask one last question. I just kind of want to riff off of something that Chris, you were just mentioning. So it's interesting because a lot of times the founder of the company, they birthed this idea into the world. It became their baby, and they are invested. Their whole life's work may be hanging right there, and they can see an impact. I'm just kind of curious, Johnny. So now you've got a new person laying new expectations. Their goal is to get a return.
Yeah.
They've got limited partners, and that's what they want. So how does that affect the culture of your company? And Steve, I'd like for you to contribute what you've seen as well. How does that affect where you were and where you are now?
Well, I think it goes back to being authentic and open. So, what I did in the beginning is that I did a monthly update to all the investors. It was, still pretty small company, or maybe 4 people at the time. We had a few investors. So I initiated very consistent, pretty honest communication about what's going on with the company. So we had 5 sections about, here is a financial, aspect. The second one, here is some good news and bad news, right? And then specific asks and special thanks, right? So I think that really helped continue the dialogue and openness, and there are no surprises. Our expectations are aligned because of that frequent, regular, consistent, and open communication. So I think, to me, that was a pretty important tool. And as a company gets bigger, it's harder and harder to put bad news, right? Because there are a lot more people get impacted by that. But had I not started when when we were small, I don't think we would have the guts to do it at this point. So I think that was, to me, pretty important as we started out.
Steve, what would you add?
Yeah, well, I think transparency is the key word that I think about in that context. No company is going to get started and not have hiccups along the way. It's inevitable. It's how it works. So the important thing is that, tell the investor, this is what's happened. This is what we're doing about it. We didn't want it to happen, but you live with it. So I think that's obviously key in terms of a working relationship, and a good investor understands that. My partner Tom, who's the CEO, and I also have our own dynamic. I sometimes use the analogy that I'm the brake on the car and he's the gas pedal, and either one of us, we would never get it. He'd run it into a cliff, and I probably wouldn't get it down the highway. But together, we managed to keep going and not go too fast. So there's a balance. There's a fine balance when you're trying to do this. So
I know we've got questions. Let's start here, to my right. So the microphone, if I can tell, I'm not sure it's working there, but I think the question was initial size of the VC firm.
I mean, I think that varies. It depends on the type of fund that you're raising. If micro VC, so are you going into just seed stage type investments, small investments, and really where are you going to get your capital from? To raise a micro fund from larger institutional investors is the probability of getting money is probably low. So you're looking at more angel investors. I would say, if you can get a fund size in the 10 million range, you're probably doing pretty good. But I mean,
I would agree. There is a movement around the country, frankly around the world, toward this micro investment. The biggest challenge has been finding investors for that, because they're generally higher risk and smaller return. And you find a lot of people that are willing to take risk on private equity tend to want outsized returns, and they want to have some pathway that there's a comfort that they're going to be able to get a return back on their money. So I would encourage it. There is a space for it, but it's definitely hard work finding the critical mass that you need in terms of funding, especially from angel investors or others. It's a challenging space to be in, but it is an important space to be in.
I think the university communities do a pretty good job of putting those type of micro funds together, because you're close to the technology, you're close to the innovation within the university. So the spin outs, you can provide that 250 to 500 that's maybe needed for that to get that company up and going. The challenge becomes, as Chris just mentioned, getting your return from that. As that company grows, Steve mentioned NewLeaf's raised $54 million to date. If you've only got 500,000 in and you can't follow on any of those future rounds, your ownership is too small to really make an impact for your investors.
Excellent. Got a question here to my left.
My name is Rob Price. I'm with a group called Better Food Ventures, and my family's originally from Posey County. I currently reside in a place, an innovation ecosystem that I've learned today is in great decline, called Silicon Valley. And it's been an interesting day for me looking at this discussion, and at times I've thought that maybe innovation, particularly in ag tech, stops at the Indiana border. And a lot of the discussion today has been really focused on what Indiana can do to strengthen its home game. But Johnny, you're one of the few ag tech startups I've seen in Silicon Valley willing to get on a plane and go play an away game and go pitch Silicon Valley. HydroGrow was here earlier. We actually had them at our event at New York. It was the first time that team had been to New York. We took them out to California. It was the first time they'd been out to Silicon Valley. So my question is, how do we get to see more away games, more Indiana entrepreneurs stepping up, getting out of the state, and through that process, bringing the story back of what Indiana is doing back to Indiana and reinforcing the message here?
Well, I think that's a great question, and there's been a number of efforts in some of the partner communities that we're in to try to form direct relationships with different organizations and things, including companies in Silicon Valley, to see if there's a way of saying, what do we have here that can add value to you, and what do you have that can add value to us? I can tell you that Indiana is deeply interested in being able to play a much broader game in the area of startup and early stage investment, well into B and C and later rounds. Under our current governor, we were able to get off the ground a $250 million fund called Next Level that is going to be a fund-to-fund with an Indiana preference. It's got a return mission, but an Indiana preference that would allow us to have more resources to invest and actually attract more resources to Indiana companies. Our practice has been, or what our experience has been in Indiana, is that oftentimes firms that do go out to Silicon Valley or go out to the East Coast, they end up leaving and going somewhere else. And obviously that's not something exciting to those of us in Indiana that are trying to build the ecosystem here.
Thank you. I have a question here.
Yeah, so we've heard from a lot of agriculture industry giants today. And building on that theme of collaboration, how are your companies and organizations working with those industry leaders? Or how can we improve that cross-pollination between industry giants and innovative companies like your guys?
Well, I would just start by saying we brought Monsanto Growth Ventures into our last round of funding, and we are working on strategic partnerships and collaborations with several others as well. This space is one where, while it's possible to go public, do an initial public offering, I think it's much more likely that startup companies will end up getting acquired by big ag companies. So building partnerships and relationships and collaborations as early as possible is a smart thing to do, and certainly something we're trying to do.
Johnny, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's really difficult to get to the top decision maker in a large corporation, right? And unless you have a personal connection, right, it's really hard to do, right? So I think another approach that we've been pretty successful is there are branches, right, local branches, and there are branch managers who are managing their local research or productions. We've have a lot more success with connecting with them first and do a local trial, right, with our products, and then the word gets up, and when the word gets up, then we can actually have a larger trial. So the kind of bottom-up approach is also a pretty effective approach to reaching those big, giant corporations.
Don't forget about your investors, though.
That's true, yes.
As investors, we have relationships with those strategics as well. Obviously, that's part of our we begin with the end in mind, and as Steve said, if acquisition is the likely path for us to get our return, they're going to be acquired by some of those larger companies. So I always like to say that in venture capital and private equity, for us, the two most important things are intellectual capital and your networks. Mm-hmm. If you leverage both of those, you got a pretty good chance of being successful. And if we can leverage our networks to provide growth opportunities for our companies, that's part of the reason why we make the investment we make. There has to be a strategic fit. We don't make an investment just to put money into something. We want to make sure that we can add value beyond the dollars that we're putting in, and hopefully we do for all of our companies.
Evan, final question?
Yeah, so for companies in the ag space, there are certain limitations like growing seasons and natural life cycles that can sort of slow down the rate at which your company can feasibly grow. So from the company side, how does that affect the way that you are pitching your company to investors who are maybe looking at other deals where companies can grow extremely rapidly as investors? How does that impact the way that you view investments in ag companies versus maybe some IT companies?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, right? When you are running a high technology company and when you're trying to get venture money, investors who don't understand agriculture are so used to a rapid iteration of products and high growth, right? So it is certainly a challenge. So I think, so admitting that challenge is again, important, but I think you could also actually take that as advantage as well. So because it's so seasonal that not many people can, come to or, get to where you are that quickly, right? So we have this technology that have proven, we have trialed 3 years with this particular local firm and big companies, and we've been doing so for 3 years, and that's really, really hard to duplicate. So yes, it's a challenge, but you could turn it into advantage as well.
Any other quick end cap to
Well,
that,
the only thing I would say is that 95% of the venture firms out there, when we started looking for money, we knew wouldn't consider us because it's agriculture. And they already have their areas of focus, and they're interested in new media, and they're interested in mobile apps and this and that. And agriculture was just outside of their area of interest, their area of expertise, the growth cycle, all of that. So you got to realize that you're going to talk to a much smaller universe of funds that understand this space and are willing to play in it, recognizing some of the challenges. And the ones that are willing to play in it won't be as concerned about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, in some ways it makes it a little bit easier for a startup to try to find who to call on, right? Because there aren't very many of us that are investing in ag. So, and those that are understand it, so you don't really have to go through explaining the story as if you would if you were calling on a firm that's more of a generalist, let's say. So because we get it, it's a lot easier. In some ways it's easier, in some ways maybe it's harder because we know more about it, and you're going to have to sell us a little bit harder to get our money, but these guys did a pretty good job, so.
Well, panelists, we know that the great global challenges on our planet, they fall into areas like healthcare, which is integrally linked to nutrition. We know that they're based on energy. That's linked to agriculture as well. Ultimately, food and water quality and availability. These are all things that you're working on. I applaud that. We need you to be successful, not only to fuel some new things in our world in terms of making a difference for the lives of our citizens, but I think this opens a new era and new imagination about agriculture. Thank you for being with us, and let's give them a big hand for their help today.